Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter. Hi there guys, it's Adam Martyn here, and welcome back to another video. Now, it is hot today, it is 30 degrees in the UK, and yes, for the UK, we can't cope with it, alright? We're not good enough, we're just gonna melt. It is very hot, but I'm back with you for another video today, and we're going to be talking about archive television. Now, the article that's the main focus today comes from transdiffusion.org. This is a great website. I've mentioned them before. If you're like me, you're into TV history, about like even the nichest parts of television, then this website is the place to go. They've got so many fantastic articles about various parts of television history. They have a YouTube channel as well where they have lots of great archive clips and stuff, the Transdiffusion organization, all that sort of stuff. So massive props to those guys over there, the team over there. They make fantastic stuff. And I was scrolling through their site and a recent article took my interest, which was titled as "What Does the Future Hold for Archive Television?" This is by Philip Renfrew, and it was published on the 9th of June. Now, archive television is a very interesting prospect because obviously that relates to programs that have passed, that have been made, and there's so much programming that has been made on, analog formats, on tape or film, that is just sitting in a vault or even like a cupboard somewhere that hasn't yet gone on to streaming, it hasn't yet been rebroadcast or digitized, and the questions are, what's going to happen to that? So let's delve into this article and we'll read a bit of it. We won't read every single part of it, but we'll read the key bits and we'll talk about it. As the television industry adapts to an era of rapid change, a remarkable opportunity is opening up for archive TV to be seen and enjoyed by a wider audience than ever before. Booksellers talk about the long tail. So the long tail is the phenomenon that most of their sales and profits come not from the latest high-profile, ghost-written celebrity biographies and cookbooks, but actually from the backlist. At any given time, millions of books are in print, most of which will only sell in relatively small quantities each year, but they're the beating heart of the publishing industry. So this long tail effect, they're saying, does that apply to the television industry in terms of programming? The British television industry has traditionally followed a very different model. For the most part, it has always been built on the foundations of producing new content, because this was what the audience was seen to be demanding. Both the BBC and ITV were very conscious that there was widespread public disapproval of repeats, which were viewed as nothing less than cynical penny pinching by much of the audience. It fueled an industry belief that the lifespan of any television programme was limited. Older programmes might have an extended life with foreign sales, but domestically the industry was always focused on creating something new. The notion of the long tail, in television terms, the concept that archive programming might continue to be of interest to part of the overall TV audience, simply didn't exist. And that is true in the earliest days of television, because again, these weren't being filmed digitally, these were filmed on actual film and then later videotape, physical things that had to be stored somewhere. And, if much of the audience back then viewed repeats as, penny pinching, not necessarily worth much compared to new programming, when space was running out, there's a reason why companies like the BBC and ITV ultimately then decided, well, a lot of this stuff that we're holding on to, it's probably got to go. There's other industry factors as well, such as equity, which is the actors union. There was a big thing about that in the early days of TV as well. But it continues saying the seeds of change can be found by at least the late 1970s. The BBC had become aware that there was a new market opening up in the form of home video. The US trade journal Variety noted this emerging trend in 1980 and reported that even at this early stage, the BBC was planning 50 hours worth of programming to be made available on home video. As the years rolled by, cheaper priced VHS tapes were shifting in huge numbers as part of the booming sell-through market, which began to displace video rentals. But yeah, the VHS industry, the arrival of home video, drastically changed a whole number of factors for the BBC, because now archive, the only way to show archive television back then, pre-VHS, was to repeat it on the television, unless you actually somehow owned the film or videotape it was first captured on. However, with the advent of home video, you could now resell these programs to people and make the revenue from it. And, when video first came about, a lot of the television and film industries balked at it, said that this is a bad idea, but then they gradually warmed to it. That's that sweet, sweet moolah coming through. By the time the era of DVD releases dawned in the early 2000s, the market for British programming, new and old, was continuing to flourish, and one of the most interesting developments was the extensive range of material released by Network DVD. A significant amount of content from the ITV archive, with whom they had a close working relationship, was issued on DVD. Especially notable was a willingness on the part of the late Tim Beddoes, who was Network's former MD, who's sadly no longer with us, to take risks. Interviewed by Newsnight, he mentioned that he was happy that some titles might only sell in the hundreds of copies, whilst others would be surprise hits. Now, yes, Network, incredible company, DVD company. Sadly, it's had a bit of a tumultuous 2023. We'll touch on that in just a second. But basically, you know, a lot of the niche programming or programming that was big but either didn't get repeated or, you know, that a lot of people might have forgotten about, Network was more than happy to take the chance and put those out onto disc, mostly on DVD, but some of their titles came to Blu-ray. Now, me, myself, I've delved into the Network catalogue. I've found some fantastic stuff on there, like a lot of some of the old Gerry Anderson programs, you know, aside from Thunderbird's Captain Scarlet, a lot of those are issued on Network. The Up series, you know, that happens every 7 years, that was on Network. That's a phenomenal thing to grab, in my opinion. So it really gave these titles a new life, especially when the vast majority of them never found their way to any sort of streaming service. You know, not the BBC, not ITV, pretty much nowhere. It does mention, very sadly, Network did go into liquidation in May of 2023, and at the time of writing, it's unclear if any other company will take over their activities. Easy to imagine, however, that the business had been dealt a fatal blow by the long-term decline of DVD sales, which poses the question, where does the future lie for archive television in the UK? And the answer, this article purports, is streaming. Two very contrasting models have emerged in the last few years, one based on paid subscription and one based on advertising. And just to touch on Network, yes, at the minute you can't access the website. It did go into liquidation. It's not really clear what's happening with their remaining stock. It's not clear if a company's in talks to purchase it and continue operations and stuff like that. But that marks a really sad day for fans of archive television such as myself, because Network, there were other companies putting out bits and pieces, but I'd argue Network was the key outlier in really pushing these programs in really strong, like, promotional packaging in both DVD and Blu-ray, some of the box sets they were coming out. They recently came out with a mammoth box set for Crossroads, like nearly 100 discs containing every episode that survives, featuring Noel Gordon. Now, I'm not a Crossroads fan, but I know for a lot of people that meant, like, that was huge, that was immense. So the loss of them is a real big blow, and yes, DVD sales are declining over the long term. I might talk about that in another video, actually. But so since that was their main base of operation, to rely on, you know, physical sales, some would argue maybe this was inevitable, but it's still a shame that it's come to pass. Back to the streaming then, you know, it says there's two kinds. There's paid subscription and there's advertising. So you have, you know, Amazon Prime, that highlights that as the key subscription model, one that has British content, both new and archive, but it's also beginning to feature more advertising supported content like the Freevee that it launched, which of course is getting Neighbours later this year, I think. But, you know, this subscription-based content, the article does mention it, but it's been brought into case recently about the viability, because, you know, they're sinking so much money into original content, and if it doesn't, you know, get that big reception, is it really all worth it? So that brings us to the other form which it mentions, which is FAST, the free ad-supported television. In terms of annual growth, FAST television is rapidly becoming a phenomenon that is changing the economic dynamics of streaming. In the UK, we have examples such as ITVX and the newly renamed Channel 4, previously All 4, streaming platforms. ITV has invested huge sums into creating the beefed-up ITVX, which is said to have 10,000 hours of available content, and I will give it to ITVX, it certainly does have a lot of programming. Back in November, I did a review of ITVX when it first sort of became publicly available, so you can go and check that out if you wish. Both ITV and Channel 4 do offer those premium services where it basically becomes subscription to walk away from ads, but it also offers that FAST, the ad-supported service as well. It also mentions the UK has a pure FAST service in the form of STV Player. One recent move by STV was to feature original 1980s episodes of the Channel 4 soap opera Brookside, a decision which has almost overnight transformed the fortunes of the platform. Broadcast Magazine reports that STV Player had 11.4 million streams in March 2023. More than 4 million of them were Brookside. So, you know, isn't that case in point? I remember actually when they announced that, loads of Brookside fans were so happy because Channel 4 themselves, you know, Brookside was on from, 1982 when the channel launched to about 2003. So that's over 20 years worth of continuous episodes that were made. And in terms of what you could go back and watch, I'm sure like maybe a smattering of episodes eventually made their way to either VHS or DVD. But the last time I looked on the Channel 4 website, it was more like a key moments thing. Like, you know, you could watch, say, the first episode or, you know, the key moments, the last episode, etc. But it was only smatterings. And the fact that STV is gradually releasing all of those episodes onto STV Player, and, you know, more than 4 million streams are of Brookside, a 40-year-old program, surely that speaks to the potential and still impact of archive television, old television. Clearly there's still a market for this. If 4 million people, it's not just 100, it's not just 1,000. Yes, obviously not necessarily 4 million people, but 4 million streams were of Brookside. That's mad. The last major part of the article is basically talking about a service that is available in the US called Tubi. Now, Tubi is a fast service. There's no sort of, subscription option. You are watching free but ad-supported content. And it's claiming that the recipe for success is essentially the long tail, relating to the book industry in action. The platform claims to have 50,000 shows, about 8 times as many as Netflix, and has built archive television and film into its DNA. In 2020, it had a reported 25 million monthly active users. That's not bad. And as of 2023, that same figure has risen to 64 million, so it's nearly trebled in size over 3 years. Its determined focus on niche programming, much of it archive, and all of it free from any subscription charge, is proving to be a winning formula. So that sounds pretty good, for archive television fans such as myself. That sounds mad. It says, sadly, Tubi isn't available in the UK, because of course it isn't. But the next paragraph that you see here is basically talking about YouTube and how that's like the next best thing. Now, it's no secret that pretty much since YouTube's inception, tons of archive programming has been uploaded to the site. Now, obviously, this brings into question, copyright disputes, the fact that 9 times out of 10, the stuff that is uploaded has not got the permission of the original copyright owner. It doesn't even fall into fair use. It's just blatantly putting something on there. However, many will defend it because there are some cases of programming that have been considered lost or archive material that hadn't seen a rebroadcast or a home media release, but yet by putting it on YouTube, it is making it found again and also introducing it to a whole new generation. So yes, there are some, you could argue, legal loopholes with YouTube if you want to get to the nitty-gritty of it, but I'm of the opinion that, if there's not a company willing to put these out on home media or not a streaming site that's willing to put these out onto streaming, then, harmlessly uploading a 40-year-old plus program to YouTube I don't think is the worst thing in the world, if you're just ripping like new content, like brand new content that's, has hundreds of millions of dollars sunk into it, and you're just putting that on YouTube, maybe don't do that. But, archive programming, especially for the sake of preservation, why not? Absolutely. It rounds off with the question, so is this the moment when archive television goes fully mainstream? As things stand, each of the UK's main public service broadcasters now have their own streaming platforms. The technology is there, the vast and rich programming archives are there, and the potential audience is there. The era when programs had to have 10 million plus viewers to be counted as a success is long gone, and instead we have an audience that has become used to seeking out content that appeals to them, not what simply happens to be on TV at any given time. Tubi has shown that a platform with a wide selection of archive content can be a winner, both for rights holders and especially viewers. Will the UK's public service streamers follow suit and start to fully harness the enormous potential of their extraordinary archives? Let's hope so. So that rounds off that brilliant article there by Philip Renfrew. Again, massive props to himself and the Transdiffusion site as a whole for putting this out. So, yes, in terms of what you've got now, if you look deep into, say, BBC iPlayer, ITVX, even Channel 4, there are smatterings of archive content there, but it's not really like a big hub of all these programs, not like what Tubi's claiming to be over in the US. I guess the closest maybe came was BritBox when that was first launched. That was promising lots of archive content from across the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5. I haven't checked out BritBox recently, so I can't attest to is that catalogue still as expansive, if that makes sense? I can't attest to that, so you'll have to let me know down in the comments. But I think if we either got Tubi over here in the UK, or if the the BBC, ITV, etc. just sort of pulled their finger out and put more stuff on there, that would be great. That would, because again, just to draw back, a lot of this archive content, right? I can't stress this enough. It's physical, like it exists on a physical medium, whether that's reels of film, stacks of videotape, and the sad thing about these things is even in the highest preservation, they will ever so slightly continue to degrade because of the formats they were filmed on. So naturally you think, well, okay, let's just go to all the archives around the UK and digitize everything. If only it was as simple a process as that. To digitize something from film or videotape is extraordinarily expensive. You got to think it's not just the process of digitizing it, it's the argument about restoring it, because again, especially with film prints, if they've not been stored very well, or if they've got like damage to them, that's got to be cleaned up, that's got to be handled very finely. So to just go in, there's a reason why only select movies, TV shows have had, like 4K restorations and releases, because these companies, I suppose, have to gauge, is the interest there that's going to recoup the enormous cost that's going to come from this. So as much as I'd love for us to be able to just, waltz through the archives, digitize everything at the push of a button, it's sadly not that simple. And the sad thing is, as time goes on, especially these older programs, so, a lot of archive telly from the 70s, 60s, even the 50s in some cases that still exists, if it wasn't put out on home media by a company like Network, who no longer exists, and if, the original broadcasters aren't willing to digitize for fear of cost, do you see what I mean? If nothing's done about this, these tapes, these films, they are going to get to a point where restoration is nigh on impossible, or maybe it is possible, but it isn't going to be necessarily the highest quality product because it's just been left to deteriorate over all that period of time. So what does the future hold for archive television? Hopefully, in my opinion, something like a Tubi, if Tubi came to the UK, was able to gain access to all, like a ton of that UK content, maybe they can strike a deal with the BBC and all the other broadcasters there. But I certainly hope, I'm really hoping, that the vast amounts of archive television that we still hold in this country that, again, hasn't been rebroadcast, hasn't been put on DVD, Blu-ray, or even VHS in many cases, that hasn't been put onto a streaming site, that hasn't become available in any way, shape, or form, hopefully that will come to pass. I mean, a final anecdote is I've recently been listening to a lot of Bee Gees, these guys, we all know the Bee Gees, great stuff, but they're, and many people know them for their disco era, like the Saturday Night Fever stuff, but their early catalogue from the late 60s is great too. Now, one album they put out in 1970 was called Cucumber Castle, and to help promote it, there was a television film, like a 50-minute film, that was made around the same time. This screened on BBC Two in 1970, around Christmas time, but as far as I can gather, apart from that broadcast, there was a very small VHS release in America only by a tiny video label, but then that quickly got pulled, probably because of rights and stuff like that. So unless you have that really rare copy of that tape or a dodgy bootleg, that Cucumber Castle film that hasn't been rebroadcast, that hasn't been re-released on any sort of Bee Gees, box set of any kind. So there is a low quality version of it that does exist on YouTube, so you can still check it out. And again, props to YouTube, because without YouTube, there might be no way for me, as a fan and viewer, to watch this without finding a dodgy bootleg on VHS that probably doesn't even work anymore. So, I'd love for things like that. And just think, you've probably, if you like archive telly, or, you were around in the analog era, there is probably a TV show or a TV film or something like that you watched, that you remember fondly, that you'd love to pick up, but it's not available on home media, it's not available on a streaming site, it's never been rebroadcast. So we've all probably got something like that. So yes, for archive television, hopefully Tubi comes over here, or the broadcasters just sort of get their act together and start churning them out. Fingers crossed one of those happens. But let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below, about archive television. What do you think about it? What do you hope the future holds for it? Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and do subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed what you saw. We'd love to have you aboard. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Hooks Media, Ben Freeman, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Bruce Danton, Globe of Reviews, Derek Chambers, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Traffy, Liam Domain, and Keith Myers, our AMTV staff members.